Hello, everybody, and welcome to our assembly on Guy Fawkes Night. Um, I hope you enjoy the fireworks display on the screen, and today we are going to have two things that we're thinking about in our assembly. One is an exciting architecture competition that you can all enter, and we're also going to have a think about COP26 and this big meeting that's been happening in Glasgow in Scotland, where all the world's leaders, or most of them, have come together to try and sort out some of the problems we're having with climate change. So we're going to have a think about what they're getting up to and what we can all do to help. So first of all, we have a very exciting architecture competition that I told you about before. And we're going to have a think about what architecture is and have a look at some buildings. So I wonder if you could have a chat in your class. Does anybody know what an architect does? And you can pause the assembly while you have a chat about that. We have lots of architecture firms in Edinburgh, lots of companies, and some of your grown-ups might even work as architects. But I wonder if anybody knows what an architect does. What does an architect design? What does an architect help to build? Have a chat in your class. Okay, so maybe you have worked out that architects help to design and build buildings. It's as simple as that. They might also help to design and build bridges, tunnels, all sorts of things that we need to move around and to live in and to work in. So an architect will have designed our school, an architect will have designed your house, an architect will have designed the bridge that you travel across in Edinburgh sometimes. Architects are really important and their job is very exciting. We're going to have an architect coming to one of our assemblies soon, and they're going to be speaking to us about their job and telling us about what they do. And then we're going to have a go at being architects and designing a new building. And there are some lovely prizes for that architecture competition, but I'll come back to that in a few minutes. So, architecture can be old, and you might recognise this building in Edinburgh. It's a very old building, and you can see from the style of the architecture, the style of the building, that it's quite old. I wonder if anybody knows where this building is and what it is. Maybe you could have a chat about that and pause the assembly while you're having a chat and see if you know which building this is. We've got a few guessing game slides, so you can have somebody in charge of pausing the slides while your class tries to decide what architecture this is. Where is the building and what is the building? You can see a clue on this building. Up on the top left hand corner, there's a big gold sign that tells you what this building used to be, and it's about to change into something different, but you can maybe try and guess what is this building, and maybe some of you might even know where it is. Architecture can be very new, very modern, and here's another piece of architecture from Edinburgh. I wonder if anybody in your class knows where this building is and what it is. You can pause the assembly to discuss this. This building was actually designed by an architect from Catalonia, which is in Spain, and it was a big competition that the government held to find architects from all over the world who might be able to design this building. So this is actually the Scottish Parliament building, and it was designed by a Catalan architect. He won the competition from all of the architects from around the world who handed in their ideas, their plans. And the slide before this one is actually Jenner's department store in Edinburgh, which was a very old department store. And it was designed by a Scottish architect back in the 19th century. Some people love the architecture that is around them and some people hate it. And this is a good example. This building here with the kind of curly, twisty top on it was recently built in Edinburgh, and it's a hotel. And some people absolutely loved it because they thought it was new and exciting and different from all of the old buildings surrounding it. You can see there's a very old building here surrounding or close by. But this new building, this hotel, really divided opinion in Edinburgh. Some people loved it, some people hated it. Maybe you could pause the assembly and have a little vote and see who loves it and who hates it. And on a totally different scale, a much smaller scale, this is a very modern house extension in Edinburgh. Again, it's right next door to some very old buildings, and some people loved this modern design, and some people hated it. Maybe you could have a vote in your class and decide whether you love it or hate it. Architecture can be found in the countryside. This is an example of a farm that was falling down, it was ruined, the rain was coming in through the roof, and a family bought this farm and decided to hire an architect to design how they were going to restore the farm. Some of our buildings are protected and they're not allowed to fall down and eventually disappear because they're thought to be too important to let go. So this farm was a protected building in the north of Scotland, very important building because it was very old, had lots of history attached to it, and it had to be saved. So the architects came up with this plan, and I think it's very difficult to tell that it's been made into a modern home for a family. It looks still like it's an old farm. Some architecture is in the city, and here's an example of a very unusual architect's design. It looks like a whole mixture of tumbled down boxes, I suppose, but this is a building and lots of people work inside this building, so very unusual. Some architecture is huge. This is a very modern skyscraper in the city of Glasgow, and some architecture is very small. This is again a very modern piece of architecture, and it's a house. And again, some people will love this design and some people will hate it. One of the things I love about this design is that underneath the living part of the house is a storage area that keeps everything dry from the rain. And you can see that the family who live here have got all of their logs that they use to heat their house in the fire in the house, stored underneath here and kept nice and dry. Architecture can look very different all over the world. This is a modern piece of architecture from Africa. And sometimes architecture in different parts of the world is made to look like something traditional from that part of the world. I wonder if anybody knows what the architect's idea was for this very curvy building in Africa. What was the architect's inspiration? What is it supposed to look like? Maybe you can pause the assembly and have a chat. Do you think it's an African animal, perhaps, that inspired this building? Which animal might it be? Or is it the mountains in the background? Is it supposed to look like the same shape as the African mountains in the background? Maybe you can have a little think. Why is there so much water around this building? It's actually built in a part of Africa that is very dry. There's not much rain. So I wonder why the architect designed this big, huge area that can fill up with water. I wonder why that's there. Is it useful or is it just for decoration? Maybe pause the assembly and have a think. This is a piece of architecture from Asia, and some of you who know quite a lot about Asia might know why there's a huge big hole in the middle of this building. It's been designed like this, and I wonder if anybody knows why some buildings in Asia have these big holes. Have a little think, and maybe there is somebody in your class who comes from Hong Kong or another part of China or maybe other parts of Asia, and maybe they know why some buildings in Asia have these big gaps designed into them. And you can pause the assembly and maybe ask people in your class if they know. Okay, welcome back. So in Asia, some people believe it's very important to design buildings so that spirits or energy can flow through the buildings, and they can move freely around the city, the spirits or the energy. And sometimes in some parts of Asia, that belief is called feng shui. And this building is an example of a building that is designed to allow energy to flow through the city. Some architects design buildings with holes in them so that when it gets very windy, the building has somewhere for the wind to pass through, and it means that the building isn't pushed by the wind and might fall down. So sometimes there's a very practical reason why buildings have the shape that they have. And this is a very famous building in Australia, which is in the continent of Australasia. I wonder if anybody knows which building this is. What is it called? What is it used for? Why is it this shape? Maybe you can pause and have a chat in your class and try and see if anybody knows any of the answers to those questions. Okay, welcome back. This building is the Sydney Opera House, and it was designed in the 1940s and 50s. So it's coming up for 100 years old when it was designed, but it looks very, very modern. And it's an opera house where people go and listen to concerts and music and orchestras and all sorts of things. And it sits on the water in Sydney Harbour. So it's designed to look like the sails of old-fashioned sailing ships. And this is a very modern building. I always think this building looks like a spaceship or something from Star Trek, if any of you know about Star Trek, the movies. A very modern building in South America. And you can see that it's got the windows pointing almost down the way, tilted down the way, and that's because this part of South America is very hot, very sunny. The buildings are also covered in this dark tinted glass so that the inside of the building is cool and it doesn't overheat. And then even in Antarctica, where nobody really lives, but scientists go there to study our climate and study what's happening to the ice, we have architecture there too. And you can see that this building is very interesting. It's where scientists live for maybe 6 years or 6 months or 9 months at a time. And you can see it's on stilts. Now, there's a very important reason why this building is on stilts. Maybe you can think about what you know about Antarctica and what the weather is like there, and why it would be really, really important for this building to be on stilts. And what might be the problem if the building wasn't on stilts? What would be difficult about getting in and out of this building? Maybe you can pause the assembly and have a chat about why this building is on stilts and why the architect designed it like this. Welcome back. I love this piece of architecture. This is in Europe, and it almost looks like furry buildings or hairy buildings, but you can see that the outside of the buildings are covered in these tiles that make it look furry or hairy. They're not really covered in fur or hair, it's just the material gives that impression, gives that illusion. I think it's a very beautiful design, and it's houses, and I love the design of this. It must be nice to have a bedroom tucked away up here in the top with these squint windows, these oddly shaped windows. So I'm going to ask you to click on this link, and I want you to look at this very, very new building that has just opened in Norway in Europe. It's an underwater restaurant, and the restaurant is called Under. And I think you will be amazed at this building. It's a very clever piece of architecture. And once you've watched the movie, I would like you to come back to the assembly, and I'm going to tell you about our competition that we're going to run. So I hope you enjoyed looking at the restaurant in Norway that is under the sea. So my question is, could you design an amazing building, an amazing piece of architecture for Edinburgh? What would it be? Would it be a house, a school, a restaurant like the one in Norway? Or would it be something completely different that I haven't thought of? Where would you build it? Would you build it on top of Arthur's Seat? Would you build it at Portobello Beach so that it went under the sea? Would you build it in your street, on the Meadows? Or is there somewhere else in Edinburgh that you think an amazing piece of architecture, an amazing new building could go? So have a think. What would it be? A restaurant, an indoor play area, a school, a house that you would love to live in? Have a think about where you would build it in Edinburgh too. Is there an amazing place that you could build it? So here are some ideas. Could it be at the beach? Could it be on top of Arthur's Seat or built into the rock? Could it be in the meadows, under the meadows, looking up at the trees, built on stilts over the top of the trees? Would it be in the city centre somewhere? Could it be at the harbour in Leith where all the ships come and go? or could it be just on an ordinary street where you live? What we want you to do is draw this amazing building that you would love to see built in Edinburgh, or you could build a model of it and take a photograph of it. It would be interesting for us when we're judging the competition, and we're going to have some architects helping us to judge the best designs before we decide who wins the prizes. It would be good for you to tell us a little bit about your building. So again, if you're drawing a building, maybe you could write on the back what it is, where it is, and tell us a little bit about your design. If you've taken a photograph of a model, again, you could maybe just put a little note on the photograph or beside the photograph telling us what the building is, where it would be built in Edinburgh, and maybe tell us a little bit about your design ideas. And we're going to have an architect joining us in November to help you come up with ideas and help you think about some of the things that architects have to think about. So architects have to think about safety. So when you're designing your amazing new building for Edinburgh, you'll have to think about safety. Can you see two problems with this building? Have a think about what the safety problems might be with this building that was built in Asia. You can see a picture of the outside and you can see a picture of the inside. Maybe have a think about what safety problems the architect didn't think about. You'll have to think about the purpose of your building. What will it be used for? It might be a hospital like this one on the left. It might be a restaurant like this new restaurant in Edinburgh, which is on the roof of a building in Edinburgh, and it has the most amazing views of Edinburgh Castle. Imagine when the fireworks are going off at Edinburgh Castle, sitting in this restaurant and looking out. So think about your purpose. What will the building be used for? If it's a restaurant or something like that, you might want to think about amazing views and where would you put it in Edinburgh? Where would you build it? If it's a hospital, you might need to think about how safely people can get in and out of the building, even people who maybe can't move very well or use wheelchairs. You might want to think about the best place for the building. This is a situation in China. Can you see what's happened here? It might look as though somebody's built a house in a very silly place, but actually it's the other way around. This house was already there and somebody decided they needed to build a highway through here, so the house is now stuck in front of the highway and it's in the way of the highway. You might need to think about how will this be built. Sometimes architects come up with the most amazing designs like this one here that turn out to be almost impossible to build. So the architect might think it's a wonderful idea, but the builders might come along and say, are you joking? How am I going to build this? So whatever you design, it has to be able to be built. You need to think about how people will get in and out, as I said. So accessibility, how will I get in and out of the building if I use a wheelchair? How will I get in and out of the building if I'm an old person and I can't climb lots of stairs? How will I get in and out of the building if I'm a very young person and I'm not very steady on my feet yet? And a very important thing that architects have to think about just now is climate change. We've been building buildings for a very long time and designing buildings for a very long time. And some of our buildings use lots of energy. So if you think about James Gillespie's primary school, one of our buildings uses so much energy because in the summertime it gets too hot because it's covered in glass and we have to switch the air conditioning on. That's not very smart if we're worried about climate change and trying to stop the amount of energy that we use and fossil fuels that we are burning to keep ourselves warm in winter or cool in summer. So the architect who designed these apartment buildings came up with the idea of making the building strong enough so that we can plant lots and lots of trees, and the trees help to keep the building cool because they shade the building from the sun. So there are lots of windows here because people like to be able to see out of their house, but the trees help to shade the building from the sun, and the trees also help to use up carbon dioxide in the air and turn it into oxygen for us to breathe. So quite a clever design, and I think it looks very beautiful too. So you might need to think about how your building will help not use too much energy and help with climate change. You might need to think about visibility. So you can see two designs here. Visibility just means how much does the building stand out? And sometimes you might want your building to really stand out, and sometimes you might want your building to hide. So you can see a building here on the left that was designed to really stand out, make a big impression so that when people walked past it, they said, wow, look at this amazing building. And then you can see another building here that is actually covered in mirrors because it is built in a forest. And the architect thought it was very important that the building did not stand out, that it kind of hid in the forest, because the important thing was that people saw the forest, not the building. So you might need to think about whether you want your building to be very visible or almost invisible. And you might want to think about taste. Now, I don't mean taste with your mouth, I mean another meaning for taste. So some people think the building here on the left is very bad taste. It looks horrible, it's ugly, it's the wrong kind of materials, and it's the wrong kind of building in the wrong kind of place. Some people were very upset about the colours on the building on the top right. And some people were very, very upset about this building that an architect designed, which looks like a giant fish. They just felt it was ugly and it was in the wrong place. So you'll have to think about whether people will like the design of your building or not, because that's important. We don't want our cities or our streets to be covered in buildings that we think are ugly and horrible. So have a think about that too. So the big question is, what will you design for our architecture competition? Will you work on your own, or will you work with a friend, or will you work in a group? You have about 2 weeks, maybe a bit longer, even if it's the end of November when you hand in your ideas, that would be fine. And what you're going to do as a class is you're going to look at all of the designs for an exciting new building for Edinburgh, and you're going to choose the 3 that you think are the best designs, the best ideas for our city. And then we're going to take the 3 from each class, and we're going to ask some architects to help us decide which are the best designs. And then there will be winners in each year group. So good luck, get your thinking hats on. You can work on this in school, you can work on it at home, you can do both, it's up to you. You can agree all of that with your teachers. And it's something a bit different, something exciting that the whole school can join in with. Even if you're 3 in our nursery or nearly 13 in our primary 7, you can take part in this competition. And it might help you decide whether you want to become an architect. And as I said, we'll have an architect coming to speak to us at one of our assemblies soon. And they're very excited about telling you about the kind of architecture that they design and telling you about what it means to be an architect, what kind of work you do. And who knows, one of you might grow up to be an architect. You might decide that's what you want to do. So good luck. I can't wait to see your designs. I think Edinburgh is a beautiful city, and I think, like the restaurant that you saw in Norway, we can probably come up with lots of ideas for amazing buildings for our city and that would make it even more beautiful. Okay, the second part of our assembly is about climate change and this big meeting called COP26 that's happening in Glasgow right now. So I want you to think about, how did you travel to school today? Maybe you could do a quick survey in your class. How many people came by car? How many people walked? How many people cycled or scootered or came in other ways to school? You can pause the assembly and maybe figure out, what was the most common way to come to school? Which way did most people use to travel to school? Some people might have even come by bus. And what we need to think about is that the best way to come to school? Because every type of vehicle, whether it's a car or a bus, uses energy. Buses and cars need to burn diesel or petrol, unless they're very modern, very new electric cars or buses. But even if they're electric cars or buses, they still have to use electricity. And that means that we have to have power stations that burn fossil fuels, coal, gas, oil. And that's not very good for our environment. And we're going to have a think about that in a minute. So it's really important that we try and switch off as much of the electricity, as much of the fuel that we use. School, there are things that we can switch off too. I know some of the classes have been absolutely brilliant at switching off lights that they don't need. We do need enough light to work, But there might be times in the day where we don't need lots of light to work because we're watching a screen or doing something different, and we could maybe switch off lights. We're switching off lights for a very small period of time. It all helps. Also in Scotland, we have colder weather in the winter months, don't we? And we're used to heating up our buildings. But what we need to try and do, maybe you can have a think about what we need to do as the seasons change so that we don't have to heat our buildings or cool our buildings. Right now, we have to keep all the windows open because of COVID. So we know that we have to then change our behaviour in school. We have to wear more layers. Sometimes we even have to wear coats in the classroom because it's important we keep fresh air coming in because of COVID. But are there other things that we could do in the summertime and in the wintertime in our school? That means that we could save energy. So let's have a think about all of these leaders that are meeting in Glasgow. So the United Nations just means that all of the leaders from countries around the world are coming together to talk. They're talking about something called CO2. So CO2 is a gas that is produced when we make energy or burn energy. So every time we drive our cars or drive our buses or switch on our lights, wherever that power has come from, usually a power station, if it's burning gas or coal or oil to make our energy so that we can switch on our lights or drive our car, it produces a gas that goes up into the air called CO2. And CO2 gas is not very good because it means that our world heats up. And that's a problem because if our world heats up too much, then lots of animals might die, lots of weather might change, and it might cause us, human beings, lots of problems. So the leaders are trying to work out how to get to something called net zero, which means that we don't put more CO2 into our air than the air can cope with. And it's not just up to the leaders, it's about you. It's about being a young climate leader. All of you, whether you're 3 years old or 13 years old, can make changes. You can encourage your family to make changes. You can remind all of us grown-ups in school to make changes like switching off the lights, turning down the heating. And lots of you came up with lots and lots of ideas a few years ago, and we've put lots of those ideas into place in school. So I'm going to give you some examples. Lots of you said we could have solar panels on the roof of the school that use the sun's energy to make some of the electricity that we need, and then we're not making CO2 gas. So we have solar panels on the roof of our gym hall, of our sports hall. And those solar panels make electricity every single day without making any CO2 gas. Some of you asked if we could stop so much water being wasted in school. So we made new taps, we installed new taps that only come on for a certain amount of time. And that means we save energy as well because our drinking water and our washing water has to be made clean, and the more cleaning of the water that takes place at the water factory, at the water plant, uses up more and more energy. So if we can save water, we can save energy. So we have done some work on that too. Some of you said a while ago now, probably 5 or 6 years ago, that our old boiler that burns gas next to our kitchen and next to our lunch hall was really old and noisy and smelly, and it was not very efficient. It wasn't very modern, and it was using too much energy. So we've had a new boiler installed, and it's a very modern boiler. It heats our school using a lot less gas, and it produces a lot less CO2. And there are lots of other things we've done, whether it's getting rid of the electric hand dryers in our toilets and putting recycled paper towels in there instead, or not buying so much single-use plastic for school lunches and for other things that we do around the school. And we can also recycle a lot of stuff. So we recycle school uniforms and we recycle lots of things that we use in school. You've all got recycling bins in your classrooms, and all of that goes off to be recycled. And it means that we're not using energy and making CO2 gas to make some of the things that we need. So I want you to think about being young climate leaders. What is it that we can do in our school that we still haven't done? I've sent your teachers a list of all the things we've done already, and I think you'll agree it's quite a long list, and I'm really, really pleased that we've managed to do so many things in our school, because all of that will make a difference. And if every school in Scotland did the same thing, and every school in the world did the same thing, we could make a real difference to climate change and stop our world from heating up. But I want you to look at the list, and I also want you to look at the other thing that I've sent your teachers, which is a list of things that we still have to do in our school. And I think every class could take responsibility for one of the things on the list of things that we still have to do. So it's called our Net Zero Plan, or our School Action Plan for Climate Change. And I think we're one of the first schools in Edinburgh to have one of these, but I know that every school will have to have one soon. So please have a look at the list of things we still have to do. Some of them are very, very simple. Switch off the lights when we don't need them. And some of them are a bit more complicated, like try and work out how you can get to school without using a car, for example. And that would need you to speak to your grown-ups at home too. And if we do some simple things like walking to school, we can call ourselves climate leaders, and we can say that we are doing climate positive things. It might be that we choose to ride a bike to school instead of taking a bus or car. It might be that we don't leave our phones plugged in, using up energy when they're already pretty well charged. Can we unplug things and stop them charging right up to the max when we don't really need that? Can we turn off the lights when we don't need them? I've started going around my house in the evening and turning off the lights in all of the rooms where nobody is there, nobody is using the room, because there's no point in a light being on if nobody's in the room. Could we use reusable drinking bottles instead of buying plastic bottles all the time? Lots of us have already done that. Could it be that we try and make our school packed lunches and our school lunches zero waste, so that we're not using energy to make food that we then just throw in the bin? And again, you might want to sit down at home with your grown-ups and think about all the things, all the food that ends up being thrown in the bin. Is there some way that you can stop wasting food? Because that is one of the best ways that we can save energy that's used to make food and stop our world. And it might be, instead of throwing things in the bin, you can take them to a charity shop, or we could swap them in school. So maybe we could have clothes swap shops, or book swap shops, or toy swap shops, where we bring the things that we don't need anymore and we can swap them with each other. And that means that we're not going out to the shops and buying things that factories have made. Factories use a lot of energy, and factories really have to heat up. So maybe we could run some swap shops in school. And what I want you to really think about is that if we have lots and lots of small things that we're doing, they all add up, and we can all be climate leaders, and we can all start today. Sometimes we think we're already doing a lot and we don't need to do anything else to stop our world from heating up, but there are still lots of things we could do. So get your thinking caps on, ask your teachers to show you the list of things we've already done and the list of things that we still need to do. And then I'm really looking forward to coming to your class and hearing about an idea that you would like to take control of, that you would like to organise. It might be that you go and video a reminder to all classes about switching their lights off, and we can send that to all of the classes. It might be that you want to organise a swap shop in your class so that you can bring old toys, old books, old clothes that you don't need, and see if anybody wants to swap them. I'm sure there are lots of other ideas that you can come up with to help make our school a net zero school and not producing so much CO2 gas and not warming up our world.